Bonjour, je suis vraiment ravi d'être ici avec vous, de voir une grande assemblée qui est formée par des collègues, des gens que je connais, quelques-uns de vous, mais je suis vraiment impressionné par tout ce que j'ai entendu depuis le commencement de notre congrès. I cannot explain to you how happy I am, but also I'm not gonna hide. When this is all over, we'll feel really relieved. It has been not that easy to pull it all together. This is not our everyday job, right? So we are public servants, and then we put this together, but this is thanks to you. So far, at least my impression is going well. So the topic, as you know, is something what I would call we'll love to hate. Technology, what it is doing to us. I'll give you a few brief opening remarks, and then I will introduce my colleagues in this order, one by one, as their turn comes. So I'm hoping that you know many of them, probably most of them already. However, just in terms of my little few words of context, I'm going to start with a reference to a scholar whom I respect a lot. It's Yuval Noah Harari. His most recent book is 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. Not sure if some of you are aware, they know his work. He talks in this book about the twin revolutions of biotech and infotech, and how these two revolutions are restructuring not just our economies and our societies, but also our own very bodies and minds. I add to that also our hearts. In fact, you might call it our soul. So what is at stake, he argues, and I fully agree with him, is our will. In fact, the free will that we always talk and we are so proud in our democracies, it's at stake. And what do we mean by that? Actually, he goes on and argues about the fact that we are, or he makes the case that we are being hacked. We are being hacked on an everyday basis. What does that mean? Just before you alarm yourselves. Given the current technologies, for the first time ever in history, in human history, we have machines and we have algorithms. And I'm looking at my colleague Omar right there, our Director General Digital Policy. We have algorithms that know us better than we know ourselves. You know, you remember Amazon sending you, buy this book, buy that book. You say, wow, these are the books I want, and you're happy. In fact, those algorithms are getting to know us better than we know our desires. So basically, it has become a commonplace to have these algorithms in our lives that understand us better than we understand ourselves. So what does that mean? Are these algorithms, the technology behind, are they going to control us? Are they going to enhance our lives? Well, that's TBD, to be determined, right? So one more thing to put on the table is that I don't think, and I think Harari also argues in the same way, that this is not a technological crisis necessarily. Actually, in fact, all these technological changes are triggering a philosophical crisis in terms of what does it mean to have human agency, individual free will in this age. So the panel is going to discuss, and I'm very proud, in fact, I feel privileged to be among them, the speakers. You will see in a second, and I know that you will agree with me. They will talk about the use, misuse perhaps, and abuse a little bit. And I also learned the other day a nice term, misuse. The opportunities, in fact, that are there, but we're not necessarily using those opportunities of technology. In a sense, short, good, bad, and the ugly. You're going to hear all of that in a few minutes. The good we heard, I don't know if Chris is here, Chris Friesen yesterday, he talked to us about this wonderful, how he's leveraging in Vancouver, in BC, corporate help. He called it social capitalism, where the IT resources are being used to enable refugee lives. But you know what else also happened when he was giving that good message? In fact, you, the audience, was already jumping onto the Slido and asking questions. Some of you started asking, well, what is happening in terms of potential misuse of private information? How are you controlling that? We didn't get to that question, but it was on the Slido list. Some of you were asking and voting up the question about, well, you say that the banks now are going to connect to the refugees, are going to help them to get loans and stuff, and then you were asking, in fact, in your Slido questions, well, who's going to make sure that the banks are not abusing the refugees' trust in that system? So we are very already alerted to the fact that all this information can be used, again, in a good, bad, and ugly fashion, right? So we see technology in that respect as a threat. Some of us, I do because of my age maybe. If you put somebody else, maybe Omar or somebody younger, my senior advisor Michael, he's here somewhere, a younger person in the seat, they would look perhaps at the world of technology with a greater hope. Given my background, my biography, where I come from, everything else, I am a little more suspicious of it. But I see it as a threat to privacy, liberties, human rights. I see it as a weapon of control. I gotta be very honest. We often have this feeling, I say to myself, it's as if we are perpetually in the same year, and the year is 1984. It's not changing, the calendar is the same. Every year is 1984. And I fear that. I fear it because I know evidence-based that's happening around. So the state now, the states, I shouldn't single out anyone, waiting to rewrite the truth. The truth is being rewritten every day. And erasing our memories. And using infotech or AI, facial recognition, trying to give us scores, punishing or rewarding us. This is actually, better believe it or not, I'm hoping you're aware of these things. These are not just nightmares, these are realities in some places in the world. So how do you really embrace technology? And that's why looking at my colleagues, they're going to help me to become more balanced in my kind of a posture, if you will. And that's the promise they gave me. This is the promise of technology, not the migration one. So I want to come out of this conversation a little more balanced, and I want to have it in such a way that I don't feel like I'm living in not only in 1984, but also for those who are familiar with in Michel Foucault's Panopticon, the old prisons and the schools and whatnot of 19th century. Now almost is becoming like the technology and the AIs and algorithms. We are just basically being watched all the time, and under all those observations collected, people knowing us better than we know ourselves. So enough said, and perhaps I hope I kept my promise. I confused you enough. I hope my panelists. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Mayor McAuliffe. I have the great pleasure of meeting her in person in Ottawa in this conference. So she's the head of Migration Policy Research Division at the International Organization for Migration in Geneva, chief editor of IOM's flagship World Migration Report, which we will get more and more involved. I promised her. A wonderful document. Please read it. She has 2 decades of experience in migration research, policy, and practice. And she's also a member of the MIT's Global Technology Review panel. This is a huge challenge because the bios are so long, so I'm just giving you kind of whatever is on the top few lines. With that, I pass it to Murray, and we will do, and again, 12 to 15 minutes max presentations, and then we will do QA.
Great. Thank you so much indeed, Umut, for that very kind welcome. First, please allow me, give me the latitude to express my thanks. My thanks to the Government of Canada for hosting this Metropolis Conference, especially to IRCC for their support. And as you said, Umut, this isn't your day jobs, but I tell you what, you've got a second career because this is going beautifully. I'd also really like to thank Enrico, especially, and his team for organising such a fantastic event. And also the participants. What I've really been very impressed by is the level of engagement. Look at this room, it's nearly full. And we're on, day 3. This is really wonderful. So thank you so much for engagement in the plenaries and also in the workshops. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Algonquin Nation and peoples. I think this is particularly important coming from an immigration country with a very significant Indigenous population myself. And I'd also really like to acknowledge the generosity and the open spirit of engagement that has been set by the conference organisers. And I think this is really important. We've had wonderful keynotes, we've had fantastic plenaries. This is not by accident, this is by design. It has been inclusive, it's been inspirational, and it's also been courageous, as we've seen in several plenaries. And I really would like to applaud the organisers for this. I think it's distinctive. It's true. So let's get on with my bit. We had a wonderful teleconference last week, and we talked about what we would be particularly focusing on. It's a very, very big subject, as we all know, migration and technology. And it does resonate historically, but there are very recent changes in technology that make us really want to look at what's occurring now, as Umut mentioned, the kind of the darker forces, and also what it means strategically for what I call the double-edged sword, some of the opportunities and some of the challenges related to technology and migration. The perspective that I would like to take is on migrants' perspectives, and what do we know about research and analysis as well as programmatic work in terms of how migrants are engaging with technology throughout the cycle. Very, very quickly, I'm not going to read this out, but we do know that technology, and especially in the last decade, has been a game changer for all of us. It's reshaped economies, social interactions, and our collective security at the personal level, but also at the international level. And cybersecurity, for example, is a very pressing concern for many countries around the world. It's impacting on all areas of society and policy, the financial sector, in terms of politics, democracy especially, and governance, but also migration. We know this, I don't need to repeat this, but it's worthwhile drawing your attention to the last 3 dot points, because we know that migration is not uniform across the world, and that there are certain areas, traditional immigration countries, for example, such as Canada, Australia, US and New Zealand, and I put that in terms of modern times. We're not talking historically, we are talking about modern times. There's the traditional guest worker countries, which we heard about in one of the plenaries earlier in the conference. The Gulf especially, in terms of guest worker countries, but there are also countries of refugee and displacement, as we heard this morning in terms of the IDP discussion. Migration and technology and displacement is interacting in different ways in different parts of the world, including because of the very big leapfrog that we've seen, and this is World Bank data, but drawing on ITU data over time, longitudinal data. We're seeing a leapfrogging of mobile or cellular phone subscriptions globally. So what that means is many of us have come from kind of an internet PC base, and then we've transitioned through into smartphones. But a lot of countries, Afghanistan is one of them, which has leapfrogged landlines and PC-based internet connectivity straight into smartphones. And that is becoming a game changer in terms of migration, but also other aspects. Now, in terms of migration and technology, I'd really like to just very briefly mention that it is being increasingly used throughout the migration cycle, right the way from origin country, pre-departure decision-making and preparation. Technology is being used more and more and more in different forms, whether that is asylum seeking, whether that is student mobility, whether that's permanent migration. It's also occurring during the act of journeys, around the act of migrating itself. And we talk about the appification of migration and increased global mobility. But also border management technology has really changed in the last 2 decades around technology, the use of biometrics and so forth. But then also integration, reintegration and return migration, and how that is affecting migrants' identities, as well as their connectivity with home, transit and destination countries. And then we'll also hear from others today about migration technology in public debates, a very interesting area, including in relation to disinformation, as Umut mentioned, and the changing of the truth and how that is occurring through technology and different platforms. And then, of course, in terms of how we actually undertake migration research and analysis, big data analysis we hear a lot about, the huge amount of material and data that is available for analytical purposes. The 3 areas that resonate most strongly with migrants and their interaction are the 3 that I've highlighted there, so I'll very, very briefly give you an overview on those. Migrant tech, very quickly, what it means. In the literature, the academic and policy literature, it really is down to 2 things: migrants' use of technology throughout the migration cycle, but also technology that is being increasingly developed by migrants themselves to support others through migration processes, whether that's integration or whether that's journeys. It's also being used increasingly to encompass migrants who are working in the tech sector, and as we know, there are very large proportions of international migrants who are very influential in the tech sector around innovation and collaboration. Why does migrant tech matter? From a migrant's perspective, it's very important. It empowers people who are exploited and abused or at risk of being exploited or abused. It expands access to a range of different services, including transnationally. It does support, and it can support, the protection of migrants throughout the cycle. Very importantly, it allows for migrants' voices to be heard in a range of different contexts and different settings. But it also points to gaps and to weaknesses within systems, and it can improve the quality of services and the experiences of migrants and non-migrants in communities. First of all, migrant decision-making and ICT. As many of the scholars in the audience know, there is a very rich and long-term body of research and analysis on migrant decision-making. But what we're seeing in the last sort of 5 to 10 years is a subsection of that really focusing on the application of ICT and how that is affecting decision-making. The key findings is that ICT is increasingly prevalent, although it's very uneven. Some areas throughout the world have very good connectivity, other areas don't have good connectivity, but we're also seeing demographic issues, even within families and within communities. Some segments of the community won't have as great access to ICT, such as women, such as some minorities and so forth, and that's having an impact too on the use. We're also seeing that the use of technology and ICT in particular can compound social pressures to migrate through seeing relative deprivation across different systems, as well as how people are undertaking journeys. And there can be a lot of social pressure in origin to migrate and also not to return for fear of shame and so forth. The appification of migration, which I'm sure many of you have read about over time, particularly came to prominence in 2015 and 16 with the movement of migrants, including refugees, through to Greece and then onward into other parts of Europe. It's also been very prevalent in regards to the Venezuelan movements and also the migrant caravans through Central America. Those are just a few examples, recent examples. But what I would like to do is just to take you back more than 70 years and read an excerpt of a chapter from the next World Migration Report and really take you back to a time which was post-Second World War to try and crystallise how migration and technology has changed and how we've become so accustomed to smartphones as a form of communication. So we're back just in the aftermath of World War II. Back then there was no internet, there were no mobile phones, there were no fax machines, and postal services were slow and often disrupted. Telegram and telephone communication was limited and costly. Paolina Roccanello arrived in Melbourne in April 1947 from Italy with her mother on the SS Misère in the shadow of the war. They were lucky to be reunited with their father, who had emigrated to Australia 8 years before, expecting his family to follow soon after. For all their wartime separation, they received only one of his letters, which had taken 5 years to reach them. Now, for us now, that is just totally bizarre. In real time, we can connect with people right across the world, and we are able to maintain connectivity. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but this is a very, very significant shift that we often forget about. Tech and integration is becoming increasingly successful at supporting migrants as they have moved, and it's operating at the local level. We'll hear probably more about this tomorrow in the Migrants and Cities plenary, but migrants are increasingly using technology to reconnect, to familiarise themselves. It's a growing area where migrants themselves are creating apps and creating other device mechanisms to be able to support and provide services to each other and to connect with local governments, for example. Those are some of the few issues that have been put together, including by a Canadian researcher, actually, who's recently published an overview of the systematic review of kind of like the literature on this topic from the University of Ottawa. This is a growing area that I would certainly like to see more research on, tech and transnational families. This is a very good example of the double-edged sword. So while we can use mobile money apps to remit more easily and more cheaply around the world, and that's certainly grown in prominence in the last 10 years, we are able to Skype and WhatsApp parent, a particular challenge, but it makes it feasible when we have split families. But there's a big issue to be answered and to be really looked at and examined in regards to social change, what it means for decision making, feminisation of migration, children left behind and the impacts in regards to children who are separated from parents, and also children who are household providers. We're seeing that increasingly, and especially in Southeast Asia. Split families, it's feasible, technology enables it, but at what cost? And this is a growing area of concern for many researchers. Key issues for migrants in quick summary: empowerment and self-agency, particularly important in terms of the use of technology and social connections. Economic advancement, such as through mobile money and remittances. But also the quality of information and advice is really questionable. There's risk and unsafe journeys, mistrusted sources. How can we ensure that information is accurate, it's timely? As Umit mentions, there's very significant concerns in regards to personal data, and also there's differential access to ICT globally. Finally, last slide, key issues for policy and practice. I've bunched those together. There are many, many more, but the key issues that come out for policy and practice are, for example, migrant vulnerability and exploitation, safety from persecution, of course, but what does that mean sometimes for irregular migration settings and border management and the challenge that can be faced with border management? We're also seeing regulation, fake news and disinformation, which is certainly going to be discussed in the panel today, and tailoring information and services for those people who are practitioners and trying to reach migrants and trying to support migrants. That is a growing area of concern and a growing area where we can see a lot of solutions, not just some of the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, especially your reference to courage, that we have to tackle some tough questions, hopefully. So next speaker is, again, I was very pleased to meet him this morning, Dr. Diego Rubio. He is a professor of applied history and governance at School of Global and Public Affairs, and the executive director of Center for Governance of Change, an applied, I love it, like Center for Governance of Change, an applied research institution that explores the political, economic, and societal effects of emerging technologies at a transnational scale. So he's going to talk to us about how technologies are maybe distorting people's perception of migration, immigration.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's right. Mary has brilliantly explained how new technologies are changing the way immigrants see immigration and deal with that phenomenon. I would like to talk about how new technologies are changing, or better to say, distorting the way that local populations in Western countries see and interact with this phenomenon. I'm going to give you an overarching view of some of the things that I've been studying for the past 5 years, and then my colleague Carlo, he's going to give you a more detailed example based on Germany, 2015, 2017, I think. Anyway, I would like to start by saying that in terms of topics, when we analyze the topics, we realize that new technologies had brought no novelty to the debate on immigration. When you analyze the fake news around immigration, you basically see that they use the same stereotypes and ideas that were out for the past 500, 600 years. So I'm summarizing here the four that I think are the key ones. The first one is the idea of an ongoing immigrant invasion, that it will immediately reshape the balance and the cultural equilibrium of national populations, right? This idea was already present in Europe, in early modern Europe. Here you have an example taken from Spain, 16th century. And it's basically being used in many of the disinformation campaigns that we have nowadays in Europe. Here you have an example taken from the last general elections in Italy, produced by Sputnik, which, as you know, is a media outlet based in Russia. The idea of an immigrant invasion is often reinforced by images like this one. These photographs were shared by thousands of people in Italy during the elections. They were retweeted by figures such as the vice president of the Italian Senate. Apparently, they saw thousands of immigrants in Libya trying to cross to Italy. The truth is that these images were taken in 1991 in Albania, and they are basically displaying an immigration from Europe and not from Africa to Europe, right? So that gives you an idea. Another myth that we see often in fake news regarding immigration today is the idea that foreign cultures such as Islam are going to gain dominance and a very powerful influence over American and Western and European societies in the coming decade, right? Many fake news are built to reinforce this fear. Here you have a recent example. After the fire that destroyed part of Notre Dame de Paris, we saw many media outlets in Europe saying that Macron was considering the possibility of including minarets in the new roof, so it will represent better modern and diverse France. He never said that. Although if you ask me, maybe it's a good idea, I don't know. Anyway, a third idea that we often see related with fake news is that immigrants are always violent and dangerous for national populations, right? On social media, on blogs, on the mouth of many far-right populist leaders in Europe, what we see is the idea that migrants are associated with crime, murder, terrorism, and rape. There are hundreds of examples of this. This one comes from Germany. There's a website called Rape Refugees that apparently displays a map where you can see all the sex crimes committed by refugees or immigrants in Germany in 2016. There's one study by The Spiegel which has analyzed all this data. Basically, they've discovered that only 21% of those supposed crimes were committed actually by refugees. The rest being committed by German citizens, European citizens, or just unknown criminals with another nationality. And in fact, many of them, they never even happen. They are just made out for this. And actually, when you look at the official data of the German state, you see that immigrants are related with 9% of sex crimes that were committed in Germany in 2017. So it's not the 80–90% that this website is trying to convey. Similar fake statistics can be found in any other Western country, especially in the United States. We've seen a lot of that because of President Trump, even if evidence shows us that migrants are not associated with more criminal activity, but rather the opposite. As you can see here, first-generation migrants are better citizens than national ones, and after they spend a few decades in those countries, they start acquiring those same patterns of criminal activity. One last idea that we often see displayed is that immigrants live on benefits and that they get better support from the national state than citizens themselves, right? So for instance, in Spain, in the past general election, around 15% of the content of the fake news that were circulated in WhatsApp were associated to this idea. And here you get an example that displays apparently two stories. Jorge, a Spanish citizen who apparently lost his home and he had to live 1 year in the streets before he could get a public shelter. as opposed to the story of Mohammed, a Nigerian immigrant who illegally crossed to Spain and immediately got a public shelter, 900 euros stipend a month, and even a free cell phone. This is all false. Jorge is actually a Greek citizen who turned 101 years old a few years ago, and he appeared in the news because of that. And Mohammed is Nigerian, but he was captured in India because of illegal drug trafficking several years ago. So it has nothing to do, he's never been in Spain. Anyway, estimates are that around 25% of the voting population of Spain saw this kind of fake news related to immigration during the election campaign. Now, the real question here is whether this had an impact in their voting behavior. This is the real doubt, right? And this connects us with the new things, the many new things that digital technologies have brought to the anti-immigration debate. I'm going to share with you just 4 main key points here. The first one has to do with the scale and the pace at which fake news now circulate. Now, in the past, you needed a significant amount of time and resources in order to put together an impactful misinformation campaign. Think, for instance, in Nazi Germany's Ministry of Propaganda and Enlightenment, that had a running budget every year of approximately the equivalence of $700 million nowadays, and hundreds of people working for it, right? Nowadays, just a few guys with very cheap equipment and no real money, they can reach an audience of thousands or millions of people in a matter of hours or days because of the combination of social media, big data, and automated agents. And just so you get an idea of the scale of this, there's a study that estimates that between 9 and 15% of all the current accounts on Twitter are automated. So we're talking about here that there are around 50 million people, 50 million bots active on that social network. This situation, coupled with the fact that anti-immigration users are far more active in social networks than pro-immigration ones, is created a distortion and an imbalance in the way that citizenships and politicians perceive the debates on immigration and immigration itself. An example, I want to show you this data taken from the Italian general election, the 6 months leading to it. And if you analyze what happened in Twitter in that period, you see that there were around 100,000 people who were publishing comments on immigration in Italian, right? Of those, and those 100,000 users can be divided in 3 communities: pro-immigration, anti-immigration, and some neutral in the middle. Now, the pro-immigration community was formed by 42,000 users, and they posted 200,000 tweets, right? Which account for 27% of the whole conversation. The anti-immigration community, on the other hand, was comprised by 25,000 users, and they published more than 500,000 tweets, which is 68% of the total debate. In other words, the anti-immigration community was 2.5 times more active than the pro-immigration one. And because of that, they managed to create the sensation that in the country that the majority of Italians supported an anti-immigration agenda. And more importantly, they also managed to create the impression that immigration was a big issue and a big problem in Italy, when it is actually not, right? Now, people we know that tend to oversight the number of immigrants living in their country or reaching their city. But the problem is that the overexposure that they are suffering because of social networks is increasing this sensation that there are too many immigrants and that there is a crisis going on and there is a threat to them, right? Now, a second thing is that because digital fake news are becoming so cheap and so easy, we are seeing now the appearance of many non-state small actors in the conversation. Actors that previously were excluded from the big game of disinformation, now they are there. So if you could see a map of disinformation 50 years ago, what you will see is like 2 or 3 big agents polluting the conversation of the majority of the population. Now you don't see that anymore. You see it's much more spread. Research shows that with some exceptions, the majority of content, fake content on immigration is produced by individuals or small groups, small institutions, not connected with governments, and all this is making much harder to fight with those agents. Another important novelty, the third one, is that for the first time, digital misinformation on immigrants is being used to damage not only the interests of those communities that are migrating, but also the interests of the nations that are welcoming or are receiving those communities by creating social division, fear, and political discontent, right? This is definitely what Russia is trying to do, or what Russian agents are trying to do. This country hosts many of the bots and media outlets that are polluting the debate on immigration in Europe and the United States. And the interesting thing is that it's not that Russia has a particular agenda on immigration like they had during the Cold War in economy, for instance, right? Putin has no particular problem with Moroccans going to Spain or Portugal. That's, you know, it doesn't matter to him really. What he wants is to take advantage of the situation to weaken the European Union. The Kremlin knows that immigration is a very divisive topic, and they're using it to cause fear and fracture and anti-establishment feelings in European countries and beyond that. So in other words, it's weaponizing the immigration topic. Now, one last novelty that I think is important that is being introduced by digital technologies has to do with the way misinformation spreads and affects the public. Now, as you know, we all now live in echo chambers. The way the Google search algorithm and our social network work makes that we live in closed system in which we only see those pieces of information, comments, photographs that reinforce our ideas and our feelings, and we never see something that comes outside that, right? That's what is called the filter bubble that, you know, we could discuss a lot about it, but there's some truth in that. Now, there are a lot of evidence of this. Here you have a brief example taken from Germany. When you look at those are the websites that tend to have fake news, and especially on topics of immigration and Islam, although not only. And when you analyze who are the visitors of those websites and who are the people retweeting content from those websites, you see that 95% of them belong to the same group, which is the group that actually supports Alternative for Germany and this kind of anti-immigration and anti-Islam agendas in Germany. Now, this is very important. This is very important because what it's telling us, and this is an interpretation, we still don't have enough data to say whether this is true or not in all cases, but in my view, what this is telling us is digital misinformation is not causing the increase in anti-immigrant feelings in Western countries, which is probably caused by socioeconomic factors that are maybe related, but you know, they are not caused by misinformation. Fake news are basically preaching to the converted. They're only consumed, they're being produced and consumed by the people who already have an image, an idea about immigration, right? So it's not that if we see more people voting for certain parties, nativist parties in Europe or in the United States, it's not because they are being misinformed necessarily, right? What this is causing, though, is a polarization of the debate on immigration, and I think this is key. So instead of, because you're closing that filter bubble, what is happening is that those who defend immigration are becoming more and more supportive of immigration, and those who oppose immigration are becoming more radical opposers of immigration. It's polarizing the debate, and this is the real challenge that we're facing nowadays, because this is preventing societies to find a common ground and find common understandings on this topic. Thank you.
Perfect timing.
Thank you very much. We're keeping our promise to present to you some very, very interesting, some of them are worrisome facts. So now you understand perhaps why I'm worried about being hacked. Now next speaker is Carlos Schwartz. He is a doctoral student at University of Warwick. His research interests are in the field of applied macroeconomics and political economy, and with a focus on text analysis and machine learning. In his recent research, he focuses on the relationship between hate speech on social media and real-life hate crime. So a deep dive on some of the aspects that you have just heard from Diego.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here, and thanks again to the organizers for putting together this great event. It's a pleasure to be here at the Metropolis Conference. As you can already see behind me, basically I'm going to pick up where Diego's presentation left off, because the link we were really interested in was if the amount of hate speech and misinformation that is circulating on social media indeed also has any real-life effects. And in particular, we were interested if anti-migrant and anti-refugee speech in Germany is powerful enough to push individual perpetrators over the edge to commit violent incidents. And in the next 10 minutes, probably I will try to basically show you the evidence me and my co-author Carsten Müller have collected over the last years on this relationship. As Diego already briefly mentioned, we are going to focus on Germany in the years 2015 until the beginning of 2017, through the height of the European migration crisis. And with this influx of more than 1 million refugees in Germany also came an unfortunate increase in the number of anti-refugee incidents. And this connection between media and what you're exposed to in media, and that this can basically influence your behavior, is nothing new, because there's now pretty good evidence basically for a lot of other media platforms. So there, Adena et al. In 2012 collected evidence that exposure to anti-Semitic propaganda in Nazi Germany was associated with increases in anti-Semitic crime later on in the Nazi era. We have evidence for the exposure to violent movies, for basically the link of television to domestic violence, and lastly the broadband internet and its potential connection to increases in sex crime. So we already have evidence for other media platforms, therefore it seems a natural question to ask if a similar link might work in social media as well. And as Diego already pointed out, there are several things that set social media apart from these original media platforms. First, it is the self-selection and the creation of social media echo chambers. Secondly, it is the interaction you get on social media platforms where you are able to change yourself with other people, mostly of a similar opinion. And this finally basically leads to the deliberation of political ideas within the echo chambers that, that has been shown to increase political polarization and also makes people develop more and more extreme ideologies. Therefore, it seems an important question to ask if these social media and the anti-refugee rhetoric played a role in the rise in anti-refugee incidents in Germany. What this map you see here now visualizes is the geospatial distribution of anti-refugee incidents in Germany. We have in our data, overall our data covers 3,335 anti-refugee incidents, ranging from property damage to refugee homes, cases of assault, cases of arson, and also anti-refugee demonstrations in Germany. And it's immediately apparent that these incidents are widely dispersed over the entirety of Germany, and there's not a single federal state in Germany in which no anti-refugee incident occurred. And what we will do now in an analysis, which I will basically try to explain to you in common terms, is we will analyze the amount of anti-refugee speech that is around in German social media based on the Facebook page of the Alternative for Germany. And we will compare areas in Germany, in particular German municipalities with high Facebook usage, relative to areas in Germany with low Facebook usage. And what we would expect if Facebook usage plays any role in the propagation of anti-refugee sentiments, we would expect to observe more anti-refugee incidents in areas with high Facebook usage, particularly in points in time when we observe spikes in anti-refugee sentiment online. And this is what we indeed find. Just as already mentioned, we are collecting data from the Facebook page of the Alternative for Germany, the largest far-right anti-refugee party in Germany. And interestingly, the AfD also has the strongest social media following of any party in Germany. So it has more followers than the Christian Democratic Union of Angela Merkel, and also freely allows their users to post their own content, which basically, as a result of these policies, the AfD has more posts, comments and likes on the Facebook page than all other parties in Germany combined, just to give you an idea of how interactive this exchange is. And as an example of the rhetoric you can find on the AfD's Facebook page, we translated the following post of one of the users. He posted that maybe there's a plot for German Jews to be exterminated by the large stream of refugees, but what could be the reason? World War II. And I think in this post already, basically, it's surprisingly easy to find this kind of rhetoric, which also aligns very well with the standard cliches against refugees that Diego already mentioned. And we are going to use this type of post to create a measure of anti-refugee sentiment on German social media. Here now I want to show you basically some introductory data. So what we do in this graph is we compare the number or the probability of an anti-refugee incident occurring in municipalities without and with at least one AfD user. And it is immediately obvious in this graph that as soon as a municipality has at least one AfD user, the probability is 3 times higher that in our observation period we're going to observe an anti-refugee incidence. Similar patterns also emerge if you look at the connection of anti-refugee incidents and anti-refugee posts over time in Germany. And you immediately see that, at least to some extent, these graphs move in tandem, and weeks in which we observe a lot of anti-refugee incidents are also the weeks in which we observe a lot of anti-refugee posts. And now in our analysis, basically, we are going to put these 2 elements together and compare the same municipalities over time, dependent on the amount of anti-refugee sentiment that is circulating on German social media. And what we find is the following. This figure basically, on the x-axis, so the horizontal axis, you see the number of refugee posts on the AfD's Facebook page, while on the vertical axis you see the number of anti-refugee incidents, and we split German municipalities into municipalities with high and low Facebook usage. And what you see is these municipalities behave relatively similarly at times of low anti-refugee sentiment. But as soon as we observe more anti-refugee sentiment circulating in German social media, we observe this disproportionate increase in anti-refugee incidents in these areas with high Facebook usage. And this observation we have in our data, this is very stable. We can basically take into account the political preferences of these people, the socioeconomic background, the age structure, the media consumption patterns. This pattern always sticks out. And to now, in the end, really get to a causal link between the amount of anti-refugee speech and anti-refugee hate crime. What we do in our analysis is we compare areas with the same amount of Facebook usage, but we analyze what happens if one of these areas is now cut off from the internet due to an internet outage. And again, following the same logic, if Facebook is propagating anti-refugee sentiment, we would expect to observe more anti-refugee incidents in the areas that are not suffering from an internet outage relative to the areas that do. And this is exactly what we observe also in our data. So this plot is basically identical to the one you saw before. It now just separately plots the number of anti-refugee incidents as squares at the bottom of the graph. And basically this reveals the striking pattern you see behind me, that while you usually observe increases in anti-refugee incidents with the amount of anti-refugee sentiment, this relationship completely breaks down in municipalities and weeks that suffer an internet outage, indeed indicating that if you are cut off from social media and not exposed to the anti-refugee speech, you are indeed not reacting to it, very much in line with this propagation mechanism. We repeat this analysis also for Facebook outages, and a similar picture emerges. And based on this evidence, we, at least me and my co-author, conclude that it seems likely that there is a connection between the exposure of to anti-refugee sentiment on social media and basically the willingness of people to commit anti-refugee incidents. So to quickly conclude here on time, basically Just to open up also for the wider picture and also for the potential later discussion, this mechanism we are documenting for the spread of anti-refugee violence should apply also to other countries and other minority groups. Nothing in our analysis should be particular to Germany, and in fact me and my co-author, we are working also on similar projects for the US and Twitter usage. As Diego already mentioned, we focus on a particular negative example where basically we focus on the far right and how individual people are pushed to commit violent incidents, while a similar mechanism might be at play on the other side of the political spectrum. So the people who are pro-refugee might become more pro-refugee or pro-migration due to their exposure to pro-migration content on social media. Just to finally conclude with the potential suggestions, I'm happy to discuss also later on when we open up to general questions. Personally, I would caution against advocating for censorship of social media. The reasons for this are twofold. First, it is not clear yet if censorship actually would solve the problem. And secondly, since there's no clear definition of hate speech everyone in this room probably could even agree on, it is not clear basically what posts should be removed and which posts should be left online. Therefore, censorship, at least to me, does not seem to be the right solution. When it comes to basically tackling anti-refugee sentiment and anti-refugee violence, our research on the one hand suggests that knowing about the amount of anti-refugee sentiment and the locations of social media users might help the police to prevent crime, since we are technically able to predict violent or anti-refugee incidents with some probability in advance, which of course could help the police to prevent these crimes. And lastly, I think it's important that we find ways to develop counter-narratives and break up the social media echo chambers, so people who are already harboring anti-refugee sentiments are not over and over again exposed to the amount of anti-refugee hate speech that we currently have circulating on social media. On this note, I conclude, and I'm happy to basically answer any of your questions later on in the panel discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Carlo. Now I'm going to turn Zeina Sowani. She's somebody that I'm very lucky to be working with. She's one of the half a dozen assistant deputy ministers at our department, Immigration, Refugees, Citizenship Canada. And I gotta say something, it's gonna sound like I'm buttering up, but it's an incredible senior management team. They support us. They are behind also having this conference. So I gotta say, I just saw a few of them around. So it is very important. So Zeina is one of them. And the reason that she's here, actually, it's a very special role. She's responsible for leading the department through a major, I underline major, and I can't underline it enough, transformational change focused on improving client experience, service delivery, enabled by agile techniques and digital technology. So she is right in the middle of technology in terms of using it from a public policy, federal department perspective. And so we're gonna hear a different side of the same puzzle from Zeina, and I'm hoping that she's gonna help me find my balance. Zeina.
Thank you, Umit, and good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to be here today to participate in this panel discussion about technology and the critical role it plays in transforming the delivery of transformation services. So my angle for the conversation is going to be very different from my colleagues, but it will give us an opportunity to see the other side of the coin. There is so much for us to learn from each other in this age of digital disruption, including understanding the risks and rewards associated with new digital capabilities. The question I am posing today is whether technology is a miracle or a menace. As Chief Transformation Officer, Chief Information Officer, and Champion of Innovation at Canada's Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada Department, I have the great privilege, as Umit mentioned, to help shape how we use technology to innovate, to transform, and to optimize the delivery of our services. I have the exceptional opportunity as an executive to go beyond transforming our IMIT capabilities to focus on a broader leadership challenge of transforming our business, including our client experience, our culture, our processes, and our tools. But before I share my perspectives on the role of technology, I think it's important for me to give you some context about the Canadian immigration situation and the challenges we face. In fact, I'm guessing many other countries represented here today share the same context in part or in whole. Our current challenges are related to rising demand and service expectations, increasing requirements to become digital, and the rapid evolution and sophistication of fraud and security threats. Here is some, oh, I need to do that myself, don't I? I'm so used to having people do that that you forget that you can do this yourself. Here is some insight into our current reality. IRCC is facing a wave of operational pressures driven by increasing application volumes across all of our streams of business. For example, temporary resident application volumes were up 25% to 2.8 million applications per year between 2015 and 2017. Permanent residence applications are expected to grow by 12% per year between 2019 and 2020, and asylum claims nearly doubled between 2016 and 2017. While the department is growing the employee base to address the increase of demand for services, this alone has not solved the problem. Instead, our challenges have translated into a growing dissatisfaction in our client base across areas such as processing speed, the overall ease of the application process, the online application experience, just to name a few. In today's interconnected world with rapid transactions and near seamless movement of information, it is increasingly unreasonable to expect our clients to wait weeks or even months for a visa decision. At the same time, client expectations about their user experiences are rapidly changing. There's a demand for more user-friendly design of application processes with up-to-date information available online about application status. This demand for user-friendly design extends beyond our clients to our employees as well. Our processing officers need better tools to be efficient and effective in their roles, especially at a time when the demands on these officers are increasing. While addressing the demands for an improved client experience, we must be certain that we are not putting our program integrity at risk. This means technology and process changes that are put in place to make our processing more efficient and improve customer experiences must respect the objectives and integrity of our immigration programs. Program integrity becomes an even larger concern as we move to an increasingly digital world with its sophisticated cybersecurity requirements. So just to recap, the challenge we are facing at IRCC is characterized by increasing operational demands driven by huge increases in demand for our services, increasing demands from our clients to improve their application experience and decrease processing times, and a responsibility to Canadians to ensure program integrity, meaning the correct decisions about applications are made every single time. So the question we had to ask ourselves at IRCC was, how can we address this complex challenge? What we found is that addressing the volume changes without changing the underlying technology and processes is not sufficient to lead to a step change in our client experience. And in fact, we have seen the opposite result, increasing client dissatisfaction. To address IRCC's current challenges, business as usual is no longer feasible. We need to fundamentally reimagine how we do business and how we can leverage modern tools, technology, and processes to deliver on our mandate. For this reason, we have embarked on a service transformation journey. Our goal is to become a world leader in immigration in order to maximize the benefits of our programs for our clients and for Canadians. In order to achieve this vision, we are focusing on 3 business outcomes: providing improved client experience by reducing wait times and generating simpler and clearer processes, driving operational excellence to process more applications faster while maintaining cost, and while maintaining a high standard for program integrity. In practice, service transformation means taking an outside-in view of the services we deliver to ensure we anchor these services in client experience excellence. By designing our services in this way, we can provide an improved client experience while actually reducing wait times and increasing program integrity. However, while we are beginning to redesign services by taking an outside-in view, we must provide the enabling technology foundation to support this work. This is where I take off my Chief Transformation Officer hat, and I will replace it with my Chief Information Officer hat. The challenge for me is the duality of technology being both a miracle and a menace. To enable the department and service transformation, we need to get our technology right. It is our responsibility to make wise decisions around technology and our use of technology. More specifically, we must understand both the benefits and pitfalls that technology offers, explore responsible use of that technology, and leverage technology as best as we can to deliver effective and efficient service. If we get technology right, it can provide the platform IRCC needs to deliver its service transformation. If we get it wrong, we can quickly end up in an ethical dilemma. As IRCC's CIO, it is my responsibility to ensure we use technology to deliver on its promise without exposing the department to undue risks. Let's take the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning as an example. We know that other countries, such as Germany and Sweden, for example, have already embedded this technology into their intake processes, and it is paying dividends for improving processing times. A recent Auditor General report has recommended that Canada use this technology to speed up the processing of refugee applications. We also know that we can automate decisions through better use of technology, and we have already done this for back office processes. In other words, artificial intelligence seems like an obvious enabler of service transformation, and in many ways it is. However, as technology and enterprise leaders, we must consider the technical security, and most importantly, ethical challenges posed by adopting new technologies. As we explore the use of this machine learning and artificial intelligence for supporting decisions regarding individuals, one does not need to think too hard about how this technology could be used improperly. We only need to pay attention to the concerns regarding a potential disruption to a free and fair election in Canada to stand up and ensure that we guard against nefarious intent. For this reason, we must ensure there are strong cybersecurity and data protection safeguards in place as we implement these technologies. As we experiment with the use of AI and machine learning to assist our team to produce both improved quality of decisions and improved speed of production, we are automating updates on risk models and profiles. And we still need to be hyper-aware of the impact of technology and never absolve ourselves of individual accountability and responsibility. At the end of the day, technology must support, not replace, our humanity. With AI, we must guard against technology becoming a menace. Similar to machine learning and advanced analytics, we are implementing other technologies to support effective service delivery at IRCC. For example, to improve both identity management and security, we have implemented the collection of biometric information. This information is, of course, a double-edged sword with many of the same ethical considerations as posed by AI. With biometric information, we reduce the risk around the individuals who wish to come into our country. At the same time, by collecting and storing this information, we increase risks to our department and indeed to Canada. We must be confident in our ability to secure and manage that information. Criminal elements evolve quickly and are continuously testing our systems, so we must continuously innovate to understand what is possible and to protect what we have. With biometrics, we must ensure technology does not become the menace. As we move forward as a department, delivering on our service transformation promise, we will become increasingly dependent on delivering a responsive technology platform and the ability to manage significant data volumes. So in both of my roles, I see the value and incredible potential for creating a strong, secure data environment that enables our delivery of services to clients while maintaining the integrity of our programs. Right now, we have just begun to explore how emerging technologies can strengthen service delivery. We have talked about applying AI to temporary resident visa applications. What if we strengthen our data environment so we can apply similar tools to settlement services, which are responsible for facilitating the integration of newcomers to Canada and which also consume a significant portion of our budget? How else might we apply emerging technologies to streamline the process of coming to Canada, becoming a part of Canadian society, while we strengthen our security and reducing risks? How can we ensure technology remains a miracle and does not become a menace? At the end of the day, technology is a tool to help us to do a better job, and we as leaders need to ensure responsible use and management of that technology. We also need to pay attention to the human factors as we introduce new digital capabilities and transform how the work gets done. This is where I'm putting a lot of my effort. If there was one thing that is keeping me awake at night, it is about transforming the culture of the organization and helping our people move successfully through the transition. Technology alone will not make us successful. We have to carefully manage the adoption of new technology and monitor desired outcomes. This work goes well past the technology cutover to focusing on reinforcing and supporting the changes that impact our employees as well as our clients. And as leaders in immigration, I challenge all of us to think beyond the benefits and risks of technology and to encourage a culture of innovation, adaptability, and agility that transforms our business. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zaina. And if you're watching the questions, you are full of ideas and questions, and I'm just going to try to pull some of the threads. I care about, of course, voting up and down, but I also not want to be directed by that necessarily. So one of the threads here I see, and this kind of applies to everybody, then later on I'm going to come to the social media part. This kind of question goes something like, basically, how can we leverage the constructive power of technology? So how are we not going to get scared of it and run away from it, but how can we use it to build inclusive, welcoming communities? Similar question to you, Murray, as the UN Migration Agency, IOM, what are you doing in terms of using the technology to enable immigrants and refugees? So it's a question of how can we do this better, but this applies obviously to all of you, even if you can touch on it very briefly, and then we can move on to the social media part. There is a lot of questions on the line. So.
Sure, thank you very much indeed. I guess in my presentation I wanted to take a fairly high-level sort of approach and look at aspects around migrants' use of technology and interaction with technology. But of course IOM is keenly focused on this topic, including to support migrants in different situations, different levels of vulnerability and so forth, and also to support member states in regards to supporting humanitarian efforts around displacement and to support consular services as well, and also in terms of research and analysis. So it's worth highlighting just a couple of different aspects. One, many of you would know about the MIG app, which has been developed by IOM in the last couple of years. It's an app that is used on a smartphone that allows migrants to connect on a whole range of different areas, including remittances advice, including visa application kind of information, health information. As you might know, IOM has a very big role in migration health and migration health assessments, pre-departure and so forth. So there's a lot of material that is available on an app that has been developed over time, and it's constantly being strengthened, and it was launched about 18 months ago. The other area that many people would know about is the displacement tracking matrix, which again has developed out of IOM's operational kind of background. That is really about supporting operations in regards to displaced persons, and resonates very strongly with the discussion this morning around IDPs, so that the organisation is able to work out where people are, what sort of support services are needed, whether that's camp coordination or WASH, other services that are required, and that has been a long-term investment by the organisation with a number of donors in regards to understanding where displacement is occurring and what operations are needed to support those populations. The third area is in regard to research and analysis. What I've observed over the last 5 to 10 years is that there is a disconnect between the technology research environment and the migration research environment, and different scholars are not necessarily connecting the two, and that's something that we've certainly in my division's been putting quite a bit more effort into in the last year or so. So recently we've done a call for our migration research series on migration and technology, and we had a fantastic response, including submissions from many people that are in the room now. We're also engaging with member states on issues around migration and technology and how they can support, their citizens who might be engaged in displacement events or engaged in migration. And we've recently run a series of events on migration and technology, including one in New York last week, and we've been called upon to do more events to bring together member states to discuss some really, difficult and challenging issues, and how we might be able to work together to formulate solutions to provide greater protection for migrants, but also to safeguard aspects around migration management.
Maybe we can pass it to Diego. Are you interested, Diego?
Diego, do you want?
Anybody else? Carlo or Zena, do you want to touch this question or no? Okay, so let's move on. So I guess at the level of social media, what people heard, you see the very first question, Diego, this is directed to you. You seem confident fake news preaches only to the converted. What about the effects on the undecided? This is a very kind of a micro level question, but also overall, I want to throw in another question that's in the thread is, how do we fight back? So people are asking a lot of questions, like do we leave Facebook? Or do we set up our own social media? And how do you fight back using the technology in terms of the fake news and the types of misleading attempts, if you will? So if you don't mind, you and perhaps Carlo applies as well.
Sure, thank you very much. I mean, that's a great question, and I'm not really confident about anything of those issues. What I would say is that you know, we don't have, first of all, we don't have a straightforward answer about how are fake news affecting people's opinion on migration and their voting behaviors, for instance. And we don't have that, first of all, because there's probably not. We see strong differences in terms of topics, countries, circumstances, so, you know, there's no one single answer, it depends. And the second thing is that this is very hard to measure, or almost close to impossible to really measure in a quantitative way, among other things because there are social networks that are, or messaging apps that are becoming more and more important in ways to spread misinformation, like WhatsApp, that are really hard to control, really hard to study. What we know for sure is that most of the people that are consuming fake news and this kind of content and are sharing this kind of content on migration, on immigrants, are people who seems to have already an opinion about it, a very strong opinion about it. We know also that undecided people are seeing these messages. Not that many as, you know, we might expect. And for instance, for the French elections, there was this study that basically proved that, you know, if you look at the whole of the population, maybe around 6% of the voters in France saw some kind of fake news at some point during the previous months of the elections. And by seeing can be just, you know, seeing it in your wall on Facebook for a second. Whether that has a real influence in the way you vote, I will say that probably not that much. There might be some undecided people that might change their opinion definitely because they are exposed to this kind of content. Regarding the question, how do we fight back? That's a real issue, right? So far, the main strategy that traditional media outlets and websites like Facebook or Google are using is fact-checking, right? And fact-checkers have grown dramatically in the past 5 years, and they are great. The problem is that, in my opinion, they're not going to solve the problem by themselves. On the one hand, because you cannot really fact-check every content that is shared in the digital space. That's literally impossible, even if you have automated systems to do so. And most importantly, because evidence will tell, because of the way the human brain works, what it's telling us is that it doesn't really matter. I mean, there are studies that show, for instance, that when politicians are giving a speech, if they know that they're being fact-checked, they will be more reluctant to include fake news or, you know, false statements. In that regard, it works. That's why we should have fact-checkers in all political debates. But on the other hand, evidence tend to show that people don't change their opinion when you show them that their politician is using fake news. There are a lot of studies on this with Trump, but not only. And when you give the people the right data, they said, okay, I don't mind. And the question is why they don't care. Why they don't change their mind? Because it's a matter of truth, is a matter of trust. Right? So if you don't trust the agent that is providing you with the counter information, and you trust more the politician that gave you the false statement, then you're not going to change your mind. And we are living now in a society in which, as you know, the level of trust, public trust on media outlets, traditional media outlets, is falling dramatically, on universities, and more importantly on governments. So we need to rebuild trust in gatekeepers, in those institutions that are meant to be the ones that decide what is true and what is not in our society. And that's hard. But if you don't do that, no fact-checking is gonna work. So, you know, just one, you know, there was a study for the UK that proved, and for the US, that basically saw that more than half of the population believed that government was lying to them when they were giving them the number of immigrants that were living or reaching their country, you know. So that's very problematic. When you have a significant amount of the population that they don't even believe the numbers that the government is giving to them, then what's the point of fact-checking, right?
Maybe
Murray is going to add a few thoughts, and then we'll come to you right away.
Sure, thank you, Emmett. I hate to say it, but we've got a chapter on in the next World Migration Report, which I had the pleasure of presenting at the pre-conference, the P2P conference, in part on reflections on migrants' contributions in an era of disinformation and disruption. And we make a series of sort of recommendations at the end around social media platforms in particular and fake news and disinformation. And one of the things that we really look at is around greater regulation of social media platforms. We're seeing that changing. The EU, Germany, the UK is debating legislation at the moment, as well as other areas. Many of us in the room would be very strong supporters of freedom of speech, but increasingly we need to link that to responsibility at a range of different levels. So that's something that we can all think about. In terms of social media too, I have spent since the recent events in Christchurch, the terrible events in Christchurch, and some of the Australian politicians' responses, I've been spending an increasing amount of time just on Twitter reporting. And I'm really surprised that there's not a hashtag report fake news, because if we actually force, Twitter and other social media providers to then investigate disinformation and fake news, it sends them a strong message. So I would encourage people to at an individual level, to report as much as often.
Thank you so much. I keep hearing the word responsibility. I heard it at the IDP as well. So responsibility looks like is going to be a very important concept. So Carlo, if you could comment on this very quickly. We have a colleague who may be technologically challenged, is not using the Slido, but has got, I'm sure, very important question. We'll come to you right away. Carlo, please.
To quickly reiterate on Diego's point, but just fact-checking is not going to solve the problem, because people just try to stay in their, basically people like to their own opinions to be confirmed, and there's even evidence now that you can tell people basically the news you're getting is wrong, and they would even be willing to pay you to receive false news just to confirm their own worldview. And this is of course a shocking thing that basically this also speaks to the importance why basically just telling these people it's wrong, it's not going to change anything. And I think the point of trust is important, because in other research with other causes, we're also investigating like the answers people give to the trust question in all of these surveys worldwide is highly predictive of basically other positions they hold. So people who do not trust the government, who do not trust the press, they will also give basically the responses you do not like in other questions and surveys, really showing that this seems to be a coherent ideology that is building there around the trust factor. And if we can rebuild it, it would be great. I think the real question is how we can do it. Social media is not helping here, but there are real world problems probably we have to solve first, but until we basically can move back to an old situation where like a large majority of the people says that basically living in democracy is absolutely essential, because this is one of, for example, one of the questions that has been dropping over recent decades.
So your turn, and Zena, whether this question is for you or not, I have a question for you, so you're not off the hook. So please, introduce yourself if you don't mind.